that we were already having amongst ourselves. We're all currently in the process of applying to graduate school, and so we thought it would be helpful to bring this to a larger audience. That said, I'm sure that you all have a wealth of knowledge that you can share, some firsthand experiences, either applying yourselves or sharing about what your programs look for in an applicant. So please feel free to jump in, share your experiences, pose your own questions, and hopefully this next 30 minutes or so can be a helpful resource for people that are interested in applying to social justice oriented programs.
Chelsea, can I just jump in real quickly?
Definitely.
We had a, Stephanie asked if it's okay to record, and I just wanted to make sure, is everybody okay with this being recorded? Okay, so we'll give that an affirmative.
Perfect, thank you. Great, so to start off, why should you pursue a social justice oriented graduate degree? Well, today there's undeniably an increased focus on social justice issues, from the global health crisis to the Black Lives Matter protests taking place across the world. The systematic inequalities that many people of color in the US have historically experienced are front and center. A graduate degree from a social justice oriented program can help prepare students to become advocates, counselors, researchers, program evaluators, policy analysts, and educators. Armed with a theoretical background and a deeper understanding of the history of inequality, students can be trained to identify structural, political, economic barriers and constraints that stand in the way of equality and work towards social change. For myself, I'm pursuing a PhD because I want to evaluate policies and implement interventions aimed at reducing the harmful and unintended consequences of the criminal justice system. I'll start by opening it up to the audience, see if anybody wants to share why they chose to pursue a social justice oriented graduate degree, and how their program maybe prepares students to address today's social justice issues.
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Ola Glansman. I am a lecturer at DePaul University. I actually got my degree, my MA PhD in community psychology at DePaul, which is, as you know, is rooted in social justice. And the reason I went into it, of course, to add to everything that you've said so far, but also kind of the history of our society in general, so we can't deny that there's so much work that still needs to be done. I also help direct 3 different programs at DePaul, which all are rooted in social justice. One is the undergraduate concentration in community psychology. And then we also have 2 brand new programs. One is a combined, it's or program where students start taking graduate courses in senior year and then finish and then next year. So it's 4+1, in a sense, master's program. And we also have a master's program that students can apply, a 2-year master's program in community psychology. And all of those programs, again, have social justice at their root because we recognize all the work that needs to be done. So thank you so much for organizing this. I'm looking forward to learning from you, and then hopefully if I have something to say, I'll chime in.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, Leah. Kicking us off. That leads us straight into the next point that I wanted to talk about was, so now that you're convinced to get a social justice oriented graduate degree program, how do you go about choosing a program? So, you talked about master's programs and sort of what things should you consider when trying to decide whether to go for a master's or maybe your PhD. So I'll just quickly go over some of the differences between them. Obviously, master's is shorter, typically 1 or 2 years. They're more career oriented. You'll gain the deep specific knowledge, often by choosing a specialized concentration to really focus your studies. A master's can help you advance your career or even switch careers, as I did. In an ever-increasing competitive job market, it'll also help set you apart from those with only a bachelor's. And the US Department of Labor reports that those with their master's end up earning around 20% more than those with only their bachelor's. Now, your PhD obviously takes much longer, at least 4 to 6 years, if not longer than that. You'll become an expert in the field, you'll be prepared to contribute original research, and you'll also be set up to teach at the highest level. Although cost is an important consideration, your PhD will typically cost more because you'll be in school longer, although many programs can offer their students financial assistance through teaching and research assistantships and fellowships that include tuition reimbursement, monthly stipends, and frequently health insurance. So it really comes down to what you want to do with your career. Personally, for myself, I did not have a stellar undergraduate record and I had very little research experience. So I decided to get my master's, make me a more competitive PhD candidate. I made some contacts in the field and hopefully I'll be able to transfer some of my master's credits and finish a doctoral program faster. Does anybody else want to share why they chose one or over the other, or have any advice for those who are still undecided on which path to take?
Well, Chelsea, I can tell you that all these routes are very good ones, and you never know what you're ultimately going to do, with your degree. But certainly, the master's is a great starting point for people, and sometimes that's great to sort of just be successful at that. And then if one wants to go further, a doctoral degree. In terms of just real quickly, the DePaul story, which Olya kind of mentioned a little bit, we started with a clinical community program in 1968 at DePaul University. So it's actually one of the first clinical community programs in the country. And then what happened was that we got lots of people who sort of said they don't want to study clinical, they just want community. So we heard that enough so that in 2000, Joe Ferrari, myself, started working on developing a community psych peer program. So we had some who came into clinical community, some who went into community. Now, the interesting thing is some people who went into pure community today are doing more clinical stuff. And some people who went into the clinical community program are just the opposite, are doing pure community stuff. So what ultimately people do is pretty varied. And what's really exciting now is, as Olya mentioned, we now have not just an undergraduate program, but also 2 master's programs. So if anybody is interested in a master's program, do let us know. And we had our first class. It's very exciting. There's 7 people in our combined, which is a BA MS program in community psych, and 6 people in our pure MS program in community psych. So, again, I always like doing a little advertising whenever I can, so don't mind me, but just wanted to put that plug in there.
Thank you, Dr. Jason. That actually pretty much leads into our next portion that Mia is going to discuss, some of the different program models that are out there.
Yeah, so another thing that might be coming up if you're starting to research programs in psychology is the difference between a counseling and a clinical psychology program. And so I think overall there's more similarities than there are differences between the 2 programs. I think some of their difference come in their historical, like how they were both created, and some of the focus is historically. And so the clinical programs in clinical psychology came first, and counseling psychology actually developed from the vocational division of the APA. And so early on, the main difference was that counseling was seen to be more centered around kind of normative life issues, helping people through job changes, helping people through kind of life crises they were having, and more kind of lifespan development, kind of normal, sort of less mentally populations that were seen to have less severe and persistent mental illness. But I think nowadays, both fields, you're going to work with lots of different types of individuals and lots of different types of settings. If you got your degree in either, they have similar licensure processes. Both have like ethics boards that are governed by the nation. And so they're really more similar than they are different. You can work in private practices, you can work in hospital settings, you can do research, you can be a professor. There's really a lot of similarities between the 2. And another kind of difference between some programs, even within counseling and clinical, is whether or not the program has a stronger research focus or a kind of practitioner focus. And that's really just what is kind of up to the individual, what they are seeking to do. Once you get the degree, you can do very similar things. And so it's really the process of grad school might be a little bit different depending on if you are in a program that's very, very heavily research focused. But the end degree is pretty similar. And online or in books about different programs, they'll typically tell you where the program is centered with regards to more of a clinical focus versus a research focus. So it's usually pretty easy to tell whether a program has a focus or whether it's pretty balanced between those two. And so now I want to open the floor to any attendees to kind of share about their own programs and yeah, and to kind of have an opportunity to share information. Yes.
Thank you so much for summarizing it. I think this is such a great step for students who are considering graduate school. And I oftentimes tell students not to think as much about the degree first, but think about what they want to do. Kind of, you know, one of those exercises that sounds kind of silly, but where do you see yourself in 10, 20 years? Because the degree is, you know, you're like, students are thinking about maybe a diploma, but it's not. It's the skills and the knowledge and the connection networking that you do in the graduate school. So what it prepares you to do. So if you can imagine yourself doing something, what type of services are you providing? So as you're saying, is it are you counseling patients? Are you working in an education setting? Are you actually, you know, running workshops in a not-for-profit? So the services that you're providing, who are your audience? Are you working with little kids in the school, in the classroom? Are you seeing clients who are older? Are you working with individuals with disabilities? That's important too. And of course, the setting. Do you see yourself in a non-for-profit arena? Do you see yourself in a healthcare arena? Do you see yourself as a professor at the university? Because all of that will help you think about what is it you want to do, hence what type of skills do you want to have, and then work almost backwards and think about which program will get you there. And of course, as you're saying, researching schools is so important because again, different schools might offer similar or same degrees, but the training is going to be different. I am biased, but I tell students who are interested in the clinical work to check out clinical community programs because the training is different. Yes, you're learning to be a clinician, but the training will differ in terms of the type of courses that you take, the type of internships and externships you're gonna apply for. So yeah, I love that you're making students do the homework and the research because I feel like it's really, really important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's so much available online. It's pretty easy to just kind of get a sense of what the program's focus is. And so definitely important to do that work.
I can also share, I guess, as somebody who I actually started out in an MA PhD program in applied psychology, which was a mix of IO and social. And then there were a couple of issues at the university that I was at, but beyond that, I just really felt like there was something missing from my training. Like, I felt like I didn't really frame it in terms of social justice, but like I thought a part of good science was creating things that were going to be helpful to people, like in actual real world settings, and that the work that I was doing would actually like help to benefit, and like I wanted to work with communities, and like I just realized I just wasn't getting that from my program. It was still a fine program, but I was just really missing that component. So I applied to a bunch of I thought it could be just that the specific school I'm at. So I applied to some social programs and also some community psychology programs. I ultimately ended up at DePaul University. But I also remember talking to my, at the time, the program head of the university that I had been at, and saying like, it's interesting, I got into all of the community psychology programs that I applied to, and I didn't get into any of the social psychology programs that I applied to. And his response at the time was, because you want to do something with your research. You don't just want to publish it in a journal and increase your H index and call it a day and get awards or whatever for your lab. You want to actually like help people with what you do. So I realized at that time that like that was something that was really important to me that I hadn't necessarily considered when I had first done my my applications the first time around.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. If anyone wants to share about their kind of specific programs and kind of have an opportunity to introduce maybe some options that are out there for students looking.
If I could just add real quickly, you know, Ira Isco was one of the founders of the field. He died a couple years ago, and Jim Kelly also from the Swampscott. So really, there's nobody left from Swampscott, the very famous 1965 meeting. But one thing that Ira said, which I think is useful just to keep framed, is that he said social justice is about fairness. It's not about mercy, which is kind of interesting quote from him.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That is really interesting.
I feel like I'm dominating this, but I have to just add, I mean, my mentor is Dr. Jason. So, you know, here's my plug for the programs that I identify with. So I'm really passionate about all of the programs at DePaul, and we're very lucky to have all the different options, from the undergraduate concentration to the combined program to the MS program to 2 graduate MA, PhD, 1 community and 1 clinical community. And the reason I'm saying that is because you have to think about the fit. And when Crystal's saying about kind of finding that fit, I feel like that is so important. You need to feel like a part of the community in order to be successful in it. And I'm guessing that at least in part, DePaul works so well for the faculty and the students who are social justice driven because of the Vincentian values. And so all of our programs, again, are rooted in social justice because the whole university you know, believes in giving back to the community, working with those on the margins, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Very similar to all of you who have taken community psychology courses, to the values of community psychology. And it just makes that, again, a great fit. And so those who are at DePaul teaching or doing research or studying, they have the opportunity to get engaged. And I feel like that's so important for students to go out into the real world while they're still undergraduates or while in graduate school, making those connections, networking. And so again, in part, I feel like DePaul is doing that because of the Vincentian values. And that attracts more community psychologists into our faculty. And that, again, it just helps it grow and then attract more like individuals. And it just creates a greater sense of community among those individuals who are striving for social justice.
And that is actually a great lead in to Simone talking about kind of gaining relevant experience and kind of getting out there and getting into the world. So I'll let her take it over.
Thanks, Mia. Yeah, and thank you all so much for sharing about your programs. So speaking on getting relevant experience, maybe you know what kind of program you want to get into, maybe you don't. So if you do kind of already have an idea of what kind of program you want to go into, it's important to consider this when you're figuring out how to spend your time. So for example, if you know that you're interested in a PsyD or a master's in counseling, it might be more beneficial to volunteer or intern at a clinical site. Whereas if you're wanting to go into a PhD, it's definitely going to be necessary to gain some research experience. So not only can this experience build your resume, but it can also help confirm your career interests. Maybe you don't know where you see yourself in 10 or 20 years. Taking the time to volunteer as a research assistant or work at a clinical site or even volunteer at a nonprofit can definitely help confirm those ideas that you have. Or maybe you'll say, never mind, I don't want to do that. For me, I thought I wanted to go into clinical work, and so I worked at a clinical site and I interned and realized, oh, I definitely want to do research. So that was really helpful for me to take that time to gain the experience before just diving into a master's program. Not only can it help with your resume, but it also can help with your personal statement. It can help build your resume, and it can also help solidify a strong letter of recommendation. For most of these programs that we've talked about, research experience is extremely important for acceptance. So during your undergrad, you could volunteer in a research lab, you can check relevant boards, reach out to your professors. Even after undergrad, you can definitely still reach back out to those undergrad professors, even just looking online for similar research labs that have interests as you. And then after undergrad, you can also look for jobs in the field. Lots of labs, like at DePaul, where we all work, do take research assistants. Additionally, a lot of social service agencies take mental health workers and other clinical jobs that don't necessarily require a master's. An added benefit of one of these jobs is that sometimes if you're looking to get a master's, these jobs do provide some sort of tuition remission or even stipends in some of these positions. So overall, when deciding how to spend your time, what internships you want, definitely take a look at your resume and take a look at the program you're applying for, even take a look at the resume of some of the current students in those programs and start to see where your gaps are and what you need to fill in those. So there are so many different components to your resume and to picking a grad school. So we're going to shift into kind of narrowing down other considerations, some other big pieces of your application. We could spend hours and hours on this, how to pick every school, but we're just going to kind of go through some of what we saw and we see in our process as these bigger pieces. Yeah, so a big consideration is the cost of applications. Because programs are so competitive, it's definitely important to apply to a lot of programs because that can definitely help increase your chances of getting accepted. It's definitely important to apply to programs that fit your research interests because that will also kind of help increase your chances. I think there are some really important unmentioned considerations when applying to programs, and the first, that applications are expensive. The average application costs between $50 to $100. So it's important to really consider what program you want to join and to not just cast your net wide, but to cast your net intentionally. Because applications are just the beginning of the cost of applying. There's also sending in your GRE scores, sending in your transcripts, and interviewing. So it's definitely important to really narrow your focus to what you think is really a good fit for you. Uma, can you talk a little bit about funding availability when applying?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so as Chelsea had kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, so master's programs usually are typically not funded. They can be pretty costly because usually master's programs are a big revenue stream for universities. But for PhD programs, you can, some of them are funded through things like tuition reimbursements, stipends, teaching assistantships, and so that can sometimes help, or that should be a very big consideration when you are thinking about which program to pick. Additionally, there are scholarships and grants that you can apply for, and we have a list of resources. So I did find some scholarship search engines that can be helpful for people to search for scholarships that you can apply for. So now, Mia, can you talk a little bit about program culture?
Yes. So something that is very important is the culture of the program that you're entering and really what it's going to be like to be in that setting and working with the individuals who make up the program. And so in trying to, kind of tease out what a program is like, the first step I think would definitely be to go online and just see what you can find, what's available on their website, what they say their values are. Of course, that's not always going to directly match up with how things, play out, but that's at least a starting point to kind of see, okay, like, is this program, does it self-identify as a social justice oriented program? Does it have, some of the focuses I want? What are the faculty doing research on? Is there research social justice oriented? And so there's a lot you can just figure out just by kind of getting a sense of the program online and of the people who kind of make up the program. There's also opportunities. Some programs on their website have emails you can reach out to current students with, so you can kind of get a sense and ask, what's it like doing research? What's it like working in this program? And also some programs, if you get to the interview stage, will allow you to actually stay with current students or meet current students throughout the interview process. And those are all really great opportunities to kind of have an opportunity to ask people about their personal experiences, to get a sense of whether or not a program would be a good fit for you. One thing that I kind of always was told by different mentors of mine is that it's a program, the fit has to go both ways. And so we think of ourselves as applicants, so we're looking for, does a program want me? Am I a good fit for them? But also you want to be happy where you are and you want to have a good experience. And so it's just as important to make sure that it's the fit is also good for you as well, that goes both ways. And so there's a lot you can lots of information available about different programs. And so I really would encourage everyone, and it's a process I'm doing myself now, kind of trying to tease out what the actual experience of going to different schools would be. And so now, if Uma, you want to share a little bit about some of the actual components of the application itself.
Yeah, definitely. So some of the components of the application that I'll talk about now are the GREs and your CV and your writing sample as well. So the GRE, I know that can be pretty daunting. It definitely was for me. But there are 3 different sections. It has a verbal reasoning section, a quantitative reasoning section, and an analytical writing section. The verbal and quantitative reasoning sections are both on a 130 to 170 score scale, and then the analytical writing section is on a 0 to 6 score scale. One thing for those students who are applying this year, definitely check your program website, because what I've been finding and what we've been kind of discussing amongst ourselves is a lot of schools are not accepting GRE scores this year. The reasoning behind that, some schools are saying because of COVID, they understand that the GRE can pose a restriction for people, and so they want to still give people the opportunity to apply even if they weren't able to take the GRE due to COVID. Some schools are no longer requiring it as well, though, because they're kind of seeing that there is more limited correlation between the test and student success. And so there are some schools that are now saying, not just this year, but even in future years, we're not going to really be accepting GRE scores. They've said they want to be a little more holistic when reviewing applications. The test can be quite costly. Well, it is pretty costly to actually take the test. And then, preparing for the test can get quite costly as well if you kind of buy a book or you take a class and things like that. There are fee vouchers, but for the actual cost of the test, but this is only a reduced fee. But that can definitely be something that is worth looking into if that poses a barrier for you. So now, Chelsea, do you want to go over the letters of recommendation?
Yeah. And just a quick note, we only have a couple more components to go over. I know we're right at the 30 minutes. We have 20 more minutes because it's lunchtime. So if anyone needs to go, feel free to jump off. You can always email us if you have any extra questions, and check the chat as well. Some people have some really good recommendations in there already. But for letters of recommendation, I assume most people are familiar with these, but programs typically ask you to have at least 3 people vouch for your readiness for a graduate program. Typically, these come from people who have a PhD and know what it takes to complete the program. So this means that you need to be cultivating relationships with your professors, your lab supervisors, internship and volunteer managers that Simone was talking about. Depending on your relationship with these people, you can ask them in person or over email. Just remember to be courteous, professional, grateful. They're doing you a favor. Other tips would be ask early. As you know, many of these people are probably writing several letters, especially during application season. Second, make it as easy as possible for them. Give them access to whatever information and materials can help them. Give them a list of your schools, your deadlines, and consider even just sending them a list of your accomplishments, either in their class or if you worked for them. And don't be afraid to specifically say why you asked them to write the letter. It'll help guide them, help trigger their memory, and give you the strongest letter possible. And then fourth, nearly all of the schools today ask your recommenders to upload your letters electronically. This means that you can give your recommenders a heads up and then trigger all of your notifications at once. That way, no emails get lost. And then lastly, just remember to follow up. You aren't bugging them. They've already committed to writing you a letter. Giving them a gentle nudge will only help ensure that nothing slips through the cracks. I know that most of my applications are due December 1st. That's just 5 days after Thanksgiving. So I will definitely be sending early reminders. And then personal statements. So for me, this is one of the hardest parts of the application, the one I procrastinate on the most. Some schools will have specific instructions, but typically they're 1 to 3 pages long. They want information on relevant background experiences, why you chose their program, and how the degree will help you set up to accomplish your goals. So remember that these need to be individualized to each school, but you can likely use some of the language in every statement. Just keep in mind that you're telling a story and a unique story. You want to sell yourself to the program. Be careful not to include every bit of research information experiences that you have. They have your CV, they have your school transcripts. So stay focused, pick a few key relevant experiences and elaborate how they prepared you for their graduate program. And lastly, be sure to edit. Give yourself enough time to put it away for a few days, come back, look at it with fresh eyes. Let your friends, your coworkers, a trusted mentor look it over and give you feedback. I know for me personally, I found that even just talking about with as many people as possible why I wanted to go back to school and why I wanted to study what I wanted to study helped put me in the practice of repeating why this was the right move for my career. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Uma to do writing samples and CVs.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, so I'll start with CVs. So this is something I used to be a little bit confused about because I know for job applications, a lot of advice I got was it should be like a very short one-page CV that you should send out. But in the process of applying to graduate school, I know they can be a little bit longer. Advice I've gotten is if it's over 3 pages, maybe you should try to cut it down a little bit. You know, at least for me, I'm very early on in this stage of my career. So, you know, I don't necessarily need to put every single experience, work experience that I've had if it's not really that relevant. So advice I've gotten is to kind of split it up into like research experience. You can do like clinical experience. You can have a section about like any awards, honors, or grants that you've won, any publications or poster presentations. You can put those citations there as well. And even some like skills or leadership positions you may be held in undergrad can go on there as well. But yeah, I think advice I have gotten is definitely maybe keep it around three-ish pages. And now, so I'll talk about the writing sample. The best option or advice that I have gotten has been that the best option would be if you have any like published or written work, such as a paper you've worked on, if you've worked in a research lab, or if you've done a literature review, it should definitely be like academic and analytical. Or, you know, if you did a thesis in undergrad, because I was a psychology major, I did have the opportunity to write a thesis. I know not everybody was a psychology major, so I did kind of want to open it up to the group and kind of see if you have any advice for people. You know, if you didn't major in psychology in undergrad, if you have any advice for what kind of writing sample somebody could submit. If anybody has any thoughts about that? Kind of going back to what Simone was saying about how gaining relevant experience, I think, you know, if you weren't a psychology major in undergrad, you can, you know, in your process of seeing if graduate school is the right thing for you, you can, you know, choose to volunteer in a research lab, and then that can probably help you gain that extra experience and, you know, actually get some practice writing so that you could submit something like that for the writing sample portion.
By the way, Uma, just quick about the writing sample. Some institutions don't ask for a writing sample, but part of it is your statement of interest, and that they can often look at the statement and see how well you write. But yeah, if you have a publication and you have something you want to add, why not? I don't think it can hurt. The only thing I would caution you is, you know, for those who are putting this together is try to have several people look over what you write, because they might be able to correct some grammar, they might help with transitions, and always good to get feedback. And there's no point in your career. You know, I've been in this field a long time, and I still send my stuff to people to get feedback. It's really helpful, always.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. So now we were thinking we'd kind of open it up. If anybody else has any further advice or anything else they wanted to add or talk a bit about, you know, any of their programs as well, feel free to do so.
So we heard that Cincinnati has a new program, a new master's program. I'm not sure if
Autumn, I think.
Autumn, yeah, Autumn, can you tell us anything about the program? Because I'd like to hear about it too.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I see there are a few people on this call who are also in my program, so I'm going to I won't quite put them on the spotlight, but I'm just going to say that they're here. So yeah, I'm in my second year. I think it's been around for 3 years. It's community and organizational research for action, which is kind of cool because you have community and organizational together, which as far as I understand is pretty uncommon, but it seems like it's a good fit. So we have 4 faculty, or I guess 5, who specifically work with us. And yeah, it's been kind of cool to be like building that community, get connected with other schools in the Midwest. This has been a cool way to do it. We have the master's program and the PhD program. Steph, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks for telling us. It's good because we have people that ask us about programs in the Midwest, so that's something we can tell people about. Just to add real quickly that sometimes there's a difference between applying to a clinical community in terms of how many applications come in, a pure community program at the PhD level, and also one at the master's level. So just to give you our experience at DePaul, which is just one setting, we get about 100 applications, sometimes 80 to 100, sometimes more, for our clinical community position. And we have 3 positions. So just think about that's very competitive. And most clinical community programs are competitive. In urban areas, it probably more so. Our community-only program would get many fewer because many fewer people know about the field of community psych. So we might get 30, sometimes more, sometimes less, of which we again select 3. And at the master's level, we had, I'm not sure how many applied to our program, but we might have. Do you remember how many applied to our program, Oya? Remember? So say we have maybe 16 that apply, and I can actually accept quite a few of them. I think we accepted something like 10, and that included the combined program too. So yeah, you can see a master's program, has many fewer people applying. The community program has more, but there is funding associated with that usually, and then the clinical community is even more in terms of applying. Just something to kind of think about as you're applying to schools.
I'd love to add one thing, and I apologize that my video is not on. I think it's really important to write a letter to yourself, and I know I added this in the chat, but I'm happy to discuss it more as to why you actually want to do this, because this is a big commitment, and it sometimes if you're like me, you might feel the fizzle is very strong, and you need to remind yourself why you need to ignite the sizzle. So I keep that little paper stuck on my laptop, and I tell myself every day, you're exactly where you're supposed to be because you know why you're doing this. And it's a nice, helpful reminder, especially when the climate is like this. Thank you.
If I may also kind of jump in and say, as Lenny said, like a lot of these PhD programs are really competitive. And so I do note, like, if you find that you apply and that you don't get into anywhere, that's not necessarily a reflection on you as a person or your worth or your academic potential or anything like that. There's so many different factors that play into like why somebody might get in or not get in. One of my favorite professors that I ever had to apply to get into graduate school 3 times. And she was one of the smartest people that I've ever met in my life. She was a talented writer. She was an English professor. So like just kind of noting it can feel like a really personal thing if for some reason you don't get into a program you really wanted to get into, or if you don't get into any program, it is not a reflection on you or your worth or anything like that. It may be a good opportunity to kind of reflect on what your experiences are and where you might strengthen your application for next round, but it is absolutely not a a reflection on you. So just kind of something to keep in mind.
And Crystal, thanks for adding that. And I'm on the sort of end of sort of the acceptance area of, the committees that accept. And I can tell you that we have no negative reservations or feelings about someone who didn't get in and then applies again. I mean, if anything, that's persistence. So we don't negatively. So if you don't get in the first time, that doesn't stop you from applying again. And actually, I agree that some of the best students that we've had at DePaul have been people who it's taken a little bit more time to get in. Just the other quick thing to mention is that sometimes it's good to have a variety of schools, some tough ones, some middle, some maybe safety schools, so that, you can have some place that you got into and you might decide not to go. But it's always better to be able to say, I got in some place, I decided not to go, than to sort of say, well, I didn't get anywhere. So sometimes it's good to have like a real kind of menu mixture of programs. It's interesting. I don't know if you know from the Cincinnati group that, thank you for all the organizing work you've done here. But Chris Keys is a graduate of the program. I don't know if you know that. And also, I was talking today with one of Chris Keys' associates, a guy named Mark Lewis, who when he graduated with Chris, took a job at the University of Texas. So it's interesting. Kind of, you can see these networks and how they blossom over time. It's really fascinating. Two of my best friends are people I went to graduate school with. So the people that you meet and you connect with, these will be your support system for the rest of your life. So that's kind of another advantage of kind of doing this education thing.
Yeah, and actually that reminded me, when I was doing my first round of applications, I did apply to DePaul and I actually did not get into DePaul. So I ended up going into a different PhD program. And then when I decided to leave that one, I applied to DePaul again and I got in that time. So, sometimes it just takes a couple of times to get in.
It's also, to piggyback on that, it's important to understand. Oh, sorry, Stephanie, you were trying to jump in, aren't you? Why don't you go ahead? I'll wait.
Thanks, Olivia. Well, as one of your co-hosts, I want to say we got 5 minutes left, but I did want to add something real quick. Like, one thing I wanted to know about getting into the graduate school process or the recruit process for folks who are most of us here that are in academia is also talk to other high school students, undergrads, and folks who may not be students, because the invitation to have a conversation about grad school is nice, because in some cultural standard, it is rude or weird to ask for a favor when you have not given anything back yet or initiated that yet. So to eliminate that, what we can do is to do our part to be kind of invasive in some ways and ask, oh, have you considered grad school? This is especially important for folks who have been historically excluded in academia. That's just my perspective though, so there you go.
No, that's an excellent point. Especially, so now I have recently started working with a Center for Access and Attainment, and we see so many students who may not consider going into graduate school, not because they can't, but because, again, as you're saying, there are other barriers. And so I definitely agree with you. And another thing, going back to what Crystal was saying and what Lenny was saying about kind of applying maybe multiple times, I think it's important not to take it personally. I agree with that, because sometimes things are just outside of your control. So I remember applying to a program where I thought I was in, and then I didn't get in, and it was shock. And literally the professor was just not taking students that year. And if I had not reached out and asked what's going on, I would have thought that something was wrong with my application. Again, considering that how there are other things at play, especially for PhD programs. And so again, anytime you're doing anything, don't take it personally and try to think of it holistically and from an ecological perspective as a community psychologist, that there are certain things you can control, you can prepare as much as you can, and then you kind of have to, see how it goes. And again, never give up and continue going at it, because echoing everybody else who mentioned this, sometimes it takes 2 times or 3 times, but as long as that's your goal, you should not take your eyes off of it.
Well, we just have a few minutes left here, so I'm just gonna wrap us up. Thank you all so much for joining and adding. I definitely think in this process, the best you're able to as you're applying is to kind of put yourself out there, keep putting yourself out there. If you're in an internship or in a research assistant and you're not getting what you need, or you need something to build your application, reach out to your advisors, reach out to your mentors, the best you can. You want to try to take that control and, you know, advocate for yourself. You need to be the best advocate for yourself. But if you see someone nearby also that needs someone to help advocate for them in their process, this can definitely be a collaborative effort. So thank you all again for contributing. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any follow-up info or follow-up questions. I believe Chelsea is going to put her email address into the chat. And then we also compiled a list of resources that we made kind of in preparing for this presentation. So if anyone wants that, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.